Hello, my name is Brett Spence, and this video will combine my Glorious Revolutionary video and the Jacobite Rebellions video. Enjoy. After the death of King Charles II of England and Scotland, after leaving no legitimate children but a lot of illegitimate children, his brother James became King James II of England, Ireland, and King of James VII of Scotland, a Catholic monarch in a majority Protestant nation in the 17th century. This isn't going to go down well. And sure enough, as soon as he ascended to the throne, rebellions broke out in England and Scotland, with his nephew James Scott, Duke of Monmouth in England, and Archibald Campbell, Earl of Argyll in Scotland. Both rebellions were crushed, and King James disbanded both the English and the Scottish parliaments and ruled by personal decree in an attempt to turn Britain into an absolute monarchy. And to protect him from his English Protestant subjects, he garrisoned Irish Catholic troops in England. Things came to a head when Mary of Monda gave birth to James Francis Edward Stuart, which led to fears of a Catholic dynasty in Britain and the arrest of 7 bishops who were against King James's absolutism. So, several notable English nobles sent an invitation to Prince William III of Orange, telling him to land in Brixham, and they will rise up and support him, and the English people will also support his taking over against the unpopular King James II of England. William, who wanted to invade England to get English resources for the war against France. So on the 5th of November, William and his 40,000 strong army landed at Brixham, where William and his English supporters wanted to avoid bloodshed. The army slowly advanced to London to allow the regime to collapse on its own, and to prevent looting, the soldiers were supplied and paid 3 months in advance. As he marched to London, most of King James's army defected to William. On the 23rd of December, King James fled and went into exile in France. And on the 13th of February 1689, William and Mary were made Queen and Queen as joint monarchs and recognized their power was limited by Parliament. And on April 11th, William and Mary were made King and Queen of Scotland, with a similar ceremony to the one in England. As this was going on the 12th of March 1689, King James, with 7,000 French troops, landed at Kinsale Island to join with the large Catholic army led by Richard Talbot, 1st Earl of Tyrconnell, who were poorly equipped and underpaid recruits. The Jacobite army laid siege to Derry, which was defended by Irish Protestants. In June 14, 1690, King William, with a 15,000 strong army made up of Dutch, Danish, French Huguenots, French Protestants, English and Scottish troops, landing in Carrickfergus, with around 21,000 joining him later. The Williamites were better trained and equipped, and made up of professional soldiers armed with the latest flintlock muskets. King James's 23,500 strong army was stationed at the town of Dolmore, which was on the opposite side of the River Boyne, and King William's army marched to face King James's army. July 1st, River Boyne. William sent a quarter of his men to cross the river at Rough Grange under the cover of the morning mist, and they faced a small force of Irish dragoons in picket line. When this was reported to King James, thinking he was getting outflanked, he ordered his best French troops along with most of the artillery to counter this. The thing that neither side knew is that the area was a deep swampy ravine, so neither side could engage except for the artillery. So the Williamites forced to take a long detour, which cut off the Jacobite retreat at Knoll. At the main ford near Oldbridge, the Dutch Blue Guard forced their way across the river using their superior firepower, but they were pinned down when the Jacobite cavalry counterattacked. After securing Oldbridge, some Williamite infantry tried to hold off the successive Irish cavalry charges with volley fire, but were scattered and were driven into the river. But the Blue Guard formed a rear guard by forming into 3 separate squares. The Williamites were unable to resume the advance till their own cavalry crossed the river, with the Irish cavalry giving in when the Danish arrived. King James, seeing the battle was lost, ordered a retreat. King William, seeing a opportunity to trap the Jacobite army as they were retreating, crossing the river Nanny at Doleague, but the Jacobites held a successful rearguard at the battle was over with a Williamite victory. And on August 1st, the siege of Derry was lifted by the Royal Navy. After the battle, King James fled to France, never to return, and King William cleaned up the last Jacobite remnants, ending with the Treaty of Limerick, which allowed Jacobites to be transported to France, freedom of religion for Catholics, and retention of property for those who remained in Ireland. The treaty was subsequently altered or ignored, establishing the Protestant ascendancy that dominated Ireland until the Catholic emancipation in 1829. Back in April 1689, Scotland, John Graham, Viscount of Dundee, not liking King William, overthrow of King James VII of Scotland, rides north to raise a Highland army for King James, raising an army between 2,400 to 3,000 men, and marched to Blair Castle. The Williamite forces were led by General Hayam MacHale, who commanded a veteran Dutch Scots brigade, along with Scottish and English regiments marched to face the Jacobite army. On July 27th, at Killiecrankie Pass, the Jacobite army defeated the Williamite army using the Highland Charge, but during the battle, Dundee was killed and command of the army was passed to Alexander Cannon. And after the battle, more Highlanders joined the Third Jacobite army, raising the army's total strength to 5,000 men. The Jacobite army marched to Dunkeld, and on the 21st of March, the Jacobite army attacked the town of Dunkeld, which was garrisoned by the Cambrian foot, and after a 4-hour struggle, the outnumbered Carolians routed the Highland army. After the government army mopped up the last Jacobite resistance, and the government ordered the Highland clans that supported King James swear an oath of allegiance to King William and Queen Mary. Many held out as long as they could, believing that King James will return, but when it became clear that King James will not return before the deadline, many clans took the oath of allegiance, with Campoch MacDonald being the last clan to swear the oath of allegiance due to being 2 days late. Secretary of Scotland, John Semple, wanted to make an example of them, sending 120 men of the Earl's Argyll Regiment of Foot to Glencoe. Late January 1692, 2 companies arrived at Glencoe from Fort William and asked for lodgings, claiming that a neighbouring clan had not paid their taxes and will be staying for a short period of time. The MacDonalds were gracious hosts to the soldiers, and on the evening of the 12th of February, Captain Robert Campbell received orders by Duncanson to kill the MacDonalds at Glencoe, which he and his men did, killing the MacDonalds in the early hours of the morning, with the soldiers killing them in their beds or when they were fleeing to the glen. It's believed that 38 people were killed, but modern estimates claim 30 were killed. The Glencoe massacre was used as Jacobite propaganda to rally the Highland clans against the government. In France, James Francis Edward Stuart, or the Old Pretender, was planning to get his throne back with French support. The French, who were at war with Britain in the War of Spanish Succession, and they wanted the British to waste resources on the rebellion. In February 1708, a French fleet and an army of 6,000 strong assembled at Dunkirk for an expedition to Scotland. In March, the fleet set sail, but due to contrary winds and a British fleet of Forth, the fleet returned home with the army failing to land in Scotland. On August 1st, 1714, Queen Anne died, and her second cousin, George, Elector of Hanover, became King George I of Great Britain and Ireland. His coronation caused a riot due to him being German and not being able to speak or understand English. People saw him as a foreigner, and people believed that James Francis Stuart had a stronger claim to the throne. So, on the 17th of August, 1715, John Erskine, the Earl of Mar, raised the Jacobite standard at Weymar, Aberdeenshire, claimed by 600 supporters, and using anti-Hanoverian sentiment to gather support. There was an attempted uprising in Cornwall, but it was crushed before it started. The Earl of Mar's army was able to capture Inverness and Perth, but were unable to capture Fort William. By October, Mar's forces neared 20,000 strong and had taken control of all of Scotland above the Firth of Forth, apart from Stirling Castle. On the 13th of November, Earl of Mar's army faced the government army at Sheriffmuir, where the government won a strategic victory, and the battle only demoralized the Jacobite army, which had a larger numbers than the government army they faced. Soon, the Jacobite rebellion was crushed in April 1716. On the 13th of April 1719, the Jacobites, with Spanish support, the Spanish were at war with Britain in the War of the Quadruple Alliance, landed at Loch Ash with 300 Spanish Marines, and the Jacobites raised 1,500 troops. But on the 11th of May, the Royal Navy captured the Jacobite HQ at Eilean Castle, capturing 43 troops, 343 barrels of powder, and on 10th of June, the government forces faced the Jacobites at Glen Shiel and defeating the Jacobites, pretty much ending the rebellion. On July 25th, 1745, Charles Edward Stuart, also known as the Young Pretender or Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed at Glenfinnan and managed to raise 1,000 clansmen. After some success against government forces by September 17th, when he captured Edinburgh, except for the castle, he had 2,400 men under his banner. At Edinburgh, he proclaimed his father, James Francis, as King James III and himself as regent. After defeating the government forces at Prestonpan on the 21st of September, he had 5,500 men under his command and marched to Manchester via Preston in hopes to find more support. There were only 200 men that had joined him. The prince's army marched as far as Derby, where the prince wanted to continue the march to London, but his advisors wanted to return to Scotland because of no French reinforcements landing in England, as well as lack of support in England. Government armies were closing in, and the government forces were capturing Jacobite territory in Scotland, so they returned with the prince in low spirits and the army morale and discipline deteriorating. After returning to Scotland and got his reinforcements on the 1st of July 1746, his 9,000 strong army marched to Stirling Castle. After defeating the government army at Falkirk, they laid siege to Stirling Castle, but on the 1st of February they lifted the siege after making little progress, and Prince Charles heard that the Duke of Cumberland's army was coming to lift the siege. After being chased by the Duke of Cumberland's army, on the 15th of April, the Jacobite army decided to face the government army at Culloden. But it was the Duke of Cumberland's birthday, and he issued 2 gallons of brandy to each regiment. Hearing this, Prince Charles ordered a night attack on the government army, but the night attack failed due to the confusion and disorder of the night march, so the Jacobite army returned to Culloden, exhausted from the all-night march. The battle began with an artillery exchange which lasted either 2 to 3 minutes or 30 minutes. Shortly after 1 p.m, Charles ordered the left to advance, and facing heavy artillery fire and advancing on boggy ground. On the Jacobite right started to charge towards the government lines, with the centre joining them. They were particularly hit hard by government volley fire, at near point-blank range, but the Jacobites reached the government lines and a fierce melee broke out. The Jacobites pushed deep into the government lines, but the government regiments formed a horseshoe formation which trapped them on three sides. Meanwhile, on the Jacobite left, the advance had stalled out due to heavy fire, and smaller units fell back due to the heavy fire, so Cumberland ordered the Cobham's 10th Dragoons to ride them down. The boggy ground impaired the cavalry, so they turned to engage the Irish pickets, who were sent to stabilize the deteriorating Jacobite left flank, but the cavalry broke through and the Jacobite left collapsed. With the Jacobites in full rout, the Royal Écossais and the Kilmarnock's foot guard, who remained in reserve throughout the battle, formed a rearguard, but they gave Prince Charles and the other senior officers time to escape before they retreated or surrendered, ending the last battle of the British Isles. The battle pretty much ended the Jacobite rebellion, with Prince Charles and some senior officers fleeing to France, while others were executed, and the Duke of Cumberland made sure that the Highlands would never rebel again. In 1750, the Highland cleansings began, with Scottish and a few English landlords forcing their tenants out of their homes so they can use the land for farming. Many went to America and later Australia and New Zealand. Surprisingly, Jacobitism is still around today, in the form of the Royal Stuart Society. If you like this video, like and subscribe. See you next time.